So now I'm going to walk you through the graphic organizer for the Selfish Giant. You will have one just like this, and you'll need to fill yours out the same way I fill mine out. Now, you listen to the story, and I'm going to go back through the graphic organizer, and I'm going to fill it in a way that will help me understand a little bit more about what I read. Now, the graphic organizer is divided into several sections, and we're going to go through the sections one at a time. But when you fill yours out on the next story, the independent practice, you may find yourself filling it out as you go, and that's perfectly okay. So I'm going to start here in this first column. Now, this first column says generate questions. So these are the kind of questions that you ask yourself as you're reading a story. So it might be something like, is this giant nice? It could be a question like, did the children know a giant lived in the castle? And we could ask also the question, who is the little boy? Now there's probably more questions that could be asked, but that's a good start. And if I have any more as I'm reading the story, I can always come back and put them on my graphic organizer. Now I'm going to switch colors because when I take notes, I like to color code them. So I'm going to switch to a different color for my next section, which is confirm predictions. So as we read, sometimes we make predictions, like we think, oh, I know what's going to happen. Oh, and I wonder if this is what's going to happen. So I think the giant is going to be selfish. Now, this is not very hard to figure out because the name of the story is The Selfish Giant. So that's not too hard to figure out. Now, I also think that the giant is going to learn a lesson. A lot of these stories, that's what happens. So that wouldn't be a huge stretch either. Now I think the giant will understand that his selfishness kept spring from coming. Okay, so I'm going to switch colors again. I'm going to go with this light blue because it's pretty. Now the next section is called Create Mental Images. Now there's a lot of words in this story that definitely call up some mental images. So I'm going to start with, I can visualize the bright colored flowers, and the green grass. I can also visualize the white snow and the gray cloak of the winter. Now our last column on this page, there's more on the back, is called Make Connections with Experience, Ideas, and Society. Now I know when I read this, it reminded me of the Greek myth of Persephone. And Persephone was kidnapped by the god of the underworld, and her mother, Demeter, was so upset that she kept spring from coming, of Persephone in Greek mythology. Now, it wasn't exactly like that story, but that's what it reminded me of when I read it. And I also know that selfishness is not a good quality. So that's what makes me think that that's going to end up being a problem for the giant. I'm going to switch colors again, and I'm going to turn my graphic organizer over. Now, when I get to the back, the first thing that's on there is the column called Make Inferences. Now, inferences are really important when we read. Now, I'm going to say that I can infer that the giant didn't talk much. The story said his conversation was limited, so that leads me to believe that he's not much of a talker. Now, I also am trying to infer that the little boy in the corner of the garden in the corner of the garden was maybe an angel, because he did not come back until the giant was dying. So that made me infer that perhaps that little boy wasn't really a little boy, he was really an angel. So now I'm going to evaluate some key ideas. Now, one of the main ideas is the giant is selfish in the beginning of the story. Now we know he changes, but that's important. Another important key idea is he starts to see that his selfishness is causing problems for him. And I can also say the little boy is an important character. And the little boy isn't real. Or at least he's real, but he's not a boy. He's something different. So now we have our last column, and this is where we're going to synthesize and create new information. So this is when we take everything that we learned and we put it together in a new way. So I'm going to say something like, at first, the giant didn't understand that he was the reason for his garden not blooming. And then we could say the little boy came back to take the giant to a new garden. And I think that's probably heaven. So now what you should have is you should have this graphic organizer. Now this one is specifically to make meaning. So what we did is we did what's called talk to the text. We ask ourselves some questions and we put what we learned into our graphic organizer, and that helps us make meaning out of the story that we read. So you should have all of your columns full just like mine. And you're going to use this as a guide because you're going to read your own story and fill out another graphic organizer about that story on your own.